Until Dawn is one of my favourite games from the PlayStation 4 generation, so despite my reservations about the price tag, I decided to bite the bullet and give this remake a try. Besides the prologue, which has been significantly expanded, the new game remains faithful to the original material. There are a few changes, one of which is an extra scene featuring Matt and Emily in Chapter 2, which was previously only available as a pre-order bonus on PlayStation 4, but is now available to all in the remake. As you'd expect, there are a few other changes, including a new secret ending for one of the characters, which is pretty cool. The story of Until Dawn remains one of my favourites nearly a decade on from its original release, due to the well-developed cast of characters, the intriguing mystery of what happened last year, while also surviving the ongoing threats of the mountain. The storyline's appeal remains as strong as ever for those who haven't experienced the game before, and I highly enjoyed replaying the game myself, even after the many times I played through the original PS4 game. I'd blissfully forgotten some of the crucial choices which led to some unfortunate consequences. The remake includes a brand new epilogue scene with one of the characters, which suggests a possible sequel game is in production, or perhaps this scene ties into the upcoming Until Dawn movie which is due out next year. Regardless, the epilogue scene on its own is rather interesting to say the least, but I'll say no more. The last thing I want to mention regarding the story is the absence of chapter recap cutscenes at the start of new chapters. Chapters now transition straight from one to the other without these scenes, which I'm indifferent about as they were a cool idea for players who didn't binge the game and genuinely may benefit from recap movies, but on the other hand, as these recap scenes were unskippable, I much prefer how much more quickly you get into the game on PS5. The gameplay of Until Dawn remains very close to the original, but with improved quality of life changes for the most part. For example, character decisions on PS4 required selecting option A or B with the analog stick, which left more room for error compared to selecting options with the triggers in the remake. Quick-time events remain much the same as the original game, but for some reason I found the newer UI to be slightly easier to read at a glance. Perhaps this was placebo, but regardless, any improvement to legibility for QTE actions can be the difference between life or death for the characters in the game, so I'm all for it. Don't move sections seemed slightly easier by default too, with a change to the shape you have to keep within the box. I also want to shout out the much expanded accessibility options, which include options for changing QTE positioning, auto-complete options for don't move sections, and much more. Unfortunately, there are some parts of the gameplay that are not so good. The control's response for general walking around feels sluggish. As you spend a large amount of time walking around environments, it is rather frustrating that there is no longer an option to walk faster. At certain moments in the game, your character will now jog automatically, but the complete lack of a walk faster button makes some sections that weren't tedious before needlessly drawn out. There are 10 new interactive objects in the remake, along with the same collectibles as the original game. Unlike the PS4 release, however, totems now have a small minigame you need to complete to unlock them. Players must rotate the totem until they find the section of the totem with a glint of light. I appreciate the developers adding additional interactivity to the game, but in reality I found this minigame finicky and irritating. Graphically, Until Dawn Remake is both a step forward and a step back. The increased level of detail throughout the remake is incredible. Character rendering sees a substantial uplift, with features such as skin, hair and clothing looking far more realistic and believable. Environments now have much more detailed textures and general asset quality is increased across the board. Where I think the remake is a step backwards is in its cinematography. The original game used fixed camera angles that allowed for cinematic shots which unfortunately are lost in transition to a more traditional third-person over-the-shoulder camera. Colour grading has also been drastically changed from the high contrast of the original to a more subtle colour palette in the remake. Personally, I'm a sucker for high contrast images, so I much prefer the look of the original, but I can see how a lower contrast allows for better preservation of details. Game performance of the original game was pretty choppy on PlayStation 4, but the game received a PlayStation 5 patch boosting the frames per second to 60. Unfortunately, this remake takes us back to 30 FPS with occasional stuttering. I experienced the most stuttering towards the latter chapters of the game, particularly when playing as Mike in Chapter 9. The increase in fidelity is pretty clear, but at times I did wish that this game had launched with the PlayStation 5 Pro, with the hopes that this machine can achieve a stable 60 FPS on this game using PSSR. Before I play any game, I usually turn off motion blur, film grain, and anything else that mimics a movie or camera, as I prefer the cleaner look this achieves. I'd honestly recommend doing this for the remake. Graphics aren't the only area to have received a large overhaul. The audio experience has too. Audio quality is improved, probably due to the PS5's 3D audio engine, but the impact is an audio experience which is much more full-bodied and dynamic than on PS4. On the other hand, the game now has a new soundtrack replacing Jason Graves' original score. Jason Graves' original Until Dawn score was brilliantly tense, atmospheric and well produced. Sadly, I failed to feel much from the new score, and it didn't seem to fit the game as well as the original did. It's also a shame that popular intro track Oh Death has been replaced in the remake. Overall, Until Dawn Remake is a good way to play the game due to the significant increase in fidelity and expanded accessibility options. The changes to the cinematography, soundtrack and lower frame rate take away some of the magic for me, as they have a negative impact on the game in my opinion. In isolation, I think the remake is good, but there are definitely things that could be improved in patches. Not in isolation, I think Until Dawn Remake was unnecessary given how good the original game was, and I would have preferred development time have gone towards games in greater need of a remake. Looking at you, Bloodborne. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments what you think about Until Dawn Remake, and thanks for watching.